Hey, what's up everybody? I recently updated the End Times Prophetic timeline into now the ultimate End Times Prophetic timeline. So if you haven't checked it out yet, make sure that you do that. It's available on the shop. And of course, if you're a member, you can also download the high resolution PNG for your own uses if you want to blow it up even greater than it already is. But nevertheless, it's available now as the ultimate End Times Prophetic timeline. And somebody suggested to me recently that I do a short video going through it, kind of just like a bird's eye view of just line item, just basically going through each of the lines on the prophetic timeline as a way to help you to, especially if you're new here, if you're clicking on this out of curiosity, then it's going to be a great way to introduce you to this material because there's a lot to talk about, right? When it comes to the end times, there's a lot to talk about. So I decided to do that, and that's what today is going to be. Today is going to be a bird's eye view, just going through this timeline very quickly. It's intended as a very brief, surface level video. So just please keep that in mind. I don't usually do very brief things if you've watched my videos because I like to go very in depth. I like to document everything so that you have the evidence there for you, kind of like a one-stop shop sort of thing. But it is going to be a great way to look at everything very quickly. It's intended as a review for people who know my stuff, who've watched my various videos and end time series and things that I'll be talking about today. If you're new here, again, it's intended as an introduction for you into these other more deeper works, so I really encourage you to go check those out. I will not be giving a lot of detail in this presentation. It's going to just be kind of bird's eye view, putting it all together so you can see visually on this brand new, awesome timeline. I was actually super excited about it. Turned out I worked a lot on it. Somebody, if you didn't see my post, somebody basically mentioned that I misspelled one of the empires, which I did. It was Medo-Perisia. So welcome to Medo-Perisia, the magical empire that never existed. So, of course, when I saw that, I had almost a heart attack. I was like, oh my gosh, I've sold these things and they're on the internet. So I went and redid it. But I'm like, if I'm going to have to go through all the trouble of redoing this, I'm going to really do it right in that sense, right? Make it even better, than the original one. And the original one was actually pretty good. I was happy with it, but there's always something that you can do that's better. And this timeline turned out to be very, very good. So I'm very excited with it. My perfectionism is satisfied, which is a hard thing to do. So I'm very grateful to God for giving me the wisdom and the time and the energy and the grace, because I get very frustrated when these things happen. And of course, if you've done any kind of design work, you know that it's not easy. So if you want detailed stuff when it comes to this, because we're going to be going through it very relatively quickly, if you want the meat and potatoes and the deep stuff, please check out my various end time series. On the timeline, which you'll see in just a second, I have linked QR codes for all the 5 major eschatological series that I have. My end time series, which this video is going to be on the page of the end time series, as a way to when they scan the code for the end times overview, then it takes them to the page with all the stuff on it. On that page, you have the entire series, which is 36 episodes. You also have a 30-minute summary that summarizes the 70 hours in that series into 30 minutes, right? And then you also have this video, which is a basic overview of the timeline, which we're doing today. So that end time series is the basic foundation of practically every major eschatological topic. So that's a great one to start with. Then you have the Great Delusion series, which is basically talking about, I believe it's like 10 or 11 episodes. It's talking about the future of Zionism, the impact of the charismatic movement, how that's going to be the final trick in uniting all the world's religions under the beast, the history of dispensationalism, and how it became into the NAR and things like that. So that's a very good series for that. The Synagogue of Satan series is about 25 hours. I think it's also like 6 or 7 episodes, 8 episodes, maybe I could be more than that. But the Synagogue of Satan talks about the history of evil, secret societies, plenty of documentation on all the schemes of the Jesuits and the papacy. So that's a great series for that. Of course, you also have my Daniel and Revelation walkthrough, where we go through this timeline, verse by verse, through the book of Daniel and then through the book of Revelation. That's the in-depth version of this video. And then, of course, you have the Sabbath series where we talk about the history of the Sabbath, the coming Sunday laws, and many important things. No, I am not Seventh-day Adventist, before you ask. I have a whole series on Adventism, so make sure you watch that so that you understand what is wrong with Adventism. Nevertheless, I'm just going to leave it right here. The mark of the beast is coming, and it's going to come in the form of Sunday worship. And not necessarily that worshiping God on Sunday is evil, but it's going to be resting and acknowledging the power that changed the times and laws, which is Satan, through his man of sin, which is the papacy, and acknowledging that authority over God's authority. And most people are deceived on this issue. So please, when you hear the Sabbath, don't turn this off. Don't think I'm a Seventh-day Adventist or whatever else, whatever other programming that kicks in. Please just indulge the evidence, all of the evidence, 140 hours of content between the 5 series that I just mentioned, to prove to you who the Antichrist power on the earth is truly, what's the destination of history, and what is it going to look like when that power enforces worship, because that's what the Bible warns of. And most people are going to take that mark upon themselves and participate in this counterfeit system, this counterfeit Christian New World Order. So make sure that you understand these things on an in-depth level. Again, if you're new here and you're just listening to this out of curiosity, I hope that this video makes you want to go deeper. I really, truly do. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Please just send me an email. I try to get to them as fast as I can. Or if you want to join the chat, you can post your questions there. I try to look at that as often as I can. So onward and forward we go. So this is the new revamped Super Saiyan Ultimate End Times Prophetic Timeline. I think it turned out really great. The graphics are much sharper and better. It's much more colorful. It's got more information on it. And of course, the images are totally revamped because I use some finally a use for artificial intelligence, right? Here are the QR codes. As you can see, they're basically on the side, and people can just scan them. Now remember, the largest size of this poster is 40 by 30. So it can get pretty big, which is really nice. But these are all the various series, and then on the sides you have basically the chapters, the relevant, if it's not every single chapter in Daniel and Revelation, these are the major prophecies stacked on top of each other over a timeline. Here's the timeline starting with 600 BC. And of course, it goes all the way past 2000. And with that little arrow says, you are here, right at the end of the end. And you'll see why in just a second. But just a quick note, some of these distances here, the times are accurate, but because of spacing and wording and things like that, the distances between some of these increments of time are longer than the others. So do not consider that the distances between, let's say, for example, 500 and 600 AD is to scale. It's not. These are just markers because I had to expand. Obviously, there's a lot of layout to deal with when it comes to this particular thing with wording and spacing and images and things like that. So just be aware, but the times are accurate. Where these things start and end is relatively accurate. So if we go to Daniel now, so just again, another quick point. The bottom is Daniel. This is Daniel, all the Daniel prophecies. And the top is Revelation, all the major Revelation prophecies. As you can see, we are in the church age, which is after the crucifixion. A lot of stuff happening in the church age. Now, let's go to Daniel. And if we just zoom in here, zoom, we're going to go nice and zoomed in. So if we go with our little guide here at the bottom, where we start with Daniel 2, this is how it's intended to go. You start at the bottom, you look at across, you kind of read it like a typewriter. Remember, if you've watched my Daniel Revelation walkthrough, and hopefully you will if you haven't yet, there's a lot of recapitulation in these scriptures where you get a layer of prophecy and then you get another layer and then another layer, and this is what it's done. That's why I think this graphic is so powerful. But anyway, the first layer is the statue. That's in Daniel 2. So you have Babylon, Persia, Greece, the legs of iron, Rome, and of course the feet and toes of iron and clay, the fifth empire. This is a very important point. There's a nice graphic of the statue here. It's a very important point because what you believe about this will determine everything else. This is the foundation. Catholicism teaches that there are only 4 empires, and I talk about that in my Daniel and Revelation walkthrough. But the reality is that there's 5 empires. That 5th empire, as you will learn more and more, is the final iteration. But that final iteration isn't as obvious because it counterfeits the work of Christ. Nevertheless, the first layer is 5 empires, and that's what you need to get out of this particular chapter, with, of course, the ending of that being a rock made by no human hands, which, of course, is Jesus, uncreated, self-existent, returning to destroy this system once and for all. The rock coming is not Jesus Jesus' first advent, creating a spiritual kingdom of God. The rock returning in Daniel 2 is the second coming, destroying the Antichrist power on the earth. That is a very important point, because the one you believe determines your beliefs, the rest of your beliefs on the end times. So if we go out just a little bit, now if we go back to the next layer, happens in Daniel 7 with the beasts. So as you can see, you have kind of the same pattern that Daniel expresses, with a lion, a bear, a leopard, and of course the terrible beast. Now the lion, we talk about this again in great depth in those walkthroughs. The lion is Babylon, the bear is Medo-Persia, the leopard is Greece, especially beginning with Alexander the Great, and the terrible beast is Rome, which of course corresponds with the legs of iron. All of these empires it's the same thing, it's just giving you a different perspective. That's another very important point that I hope that this visual illustrates, because a lot of people read these prophecies linearly and they don't realize the recapitulation that happens. But if you can see that this is like a cake with many layers, with different perspectives, talking about the same things, so that you have a very comprehensive, colorful picture of a particular reality, that's going to be very helpful. By the way, after the terrible beast, we get a little more detail about this iron and clay kingdom. We learn from Daniel's beast in Daniel 7 that there are 3 horns, 3 powers that are removed. And then, of course, there's this little horn power that comes up. And this all happens during the iron and clay kingdom. So you see, each layer gives you a more in-depth perspective as to the previous one. The previous one, we learned that there's 5 empires. The next major chapter, which is Daniel 7, we learn that the 5th empire, there's this personal type of power that comes out of it. And he also uproots 3 powers before him. And of course, there are historical fulfillments for these, with the papal power uprooting the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. And again, I'm just going to leave it at that. Go for the videos that I mentioned to get in-depth breakdown of that. Now, the next chapter up on this timeline is Daniel 8. And of course, Daniel 8 is talking about the same things, but some things are omitted. They're not necessarily mentioned explicitly, because this is just another angle on the same topic. And if you don't realize that, then it's easy to misinterpret these things. But we do talk about Medo-Persia and Greece specifically. So it confirms the order of these empires which existed. Now, in this particular case, this is one of those situations where the times did not allow for the spacing to be, very obvious, so we had to be creative. You have Medo-Persia, which ruled for quite a bit of time, but then Alexander the Great came, as you can see. If I can just magnify this, you can see that Alexander the Great begins at the same time as the leopard, which of course begins the thighs of bronze with Greece. So they're beginning at the same time, but Alexander the Great, which is the goat with a unicorn. AI, you got to hand it to AI. AI actually did a great job visualizing these. I just typed it. I'm like, okay, show me a goat with a unicorn and whatever, is described in the Bible. So I was like, this is really cool. Finally, a use for AI. But anyway, Alexander the Great is the great horn that comes and basically destroys Medo-Persia, but he didn't rule for very long. As you can see, this is a very sliver of time. It's about 10 years. And then after him, the rest of the Bronze Kingdom is the 4 Greek kingdoms, where his generals basically took over and it split the kingdom up in 4s. But this is all part of the Bronze Kingdom. Now, the next thing that we see, we skip, again, we don't have everything in this particular chapter. In Daniel 8, you don't have Babylon mentioned. That doesn't mean Babylon doesn't exist. It just means the focus is on this particular aspect, because there's more that we learn about the little horn in Daniel 8. So there's a section here between the Bronze Kingdom and the little horn power, which what I wrote here is, at the latter end of their kingdom in Daniel 8:23, this is a statement of the continuation of empires. In Daniel 7, it discusses that these beasts are, although their dominion was taken away, their life was prolonged for a while. In other words, there's this sense that you'll see over and over again through Daniel 2, through Daniel 7, through Mystery Babylon, that it's just the same system basically changing packages every time, because God judges these systems, and so Satan just leapfrogs to the next one, and then God judges it, and so on and so forth. So that's the ongoing pattern of these empires. And that's why if you understand that, then you understand that when it mentions the 4 Greek kingdoms, and then there's no mention of Rome, but then suddenly now we're talking about the little horn, there's an understood continuity between these two things. Hence, Greco-Roman. That's why we call it Greco-Roman culture. Yeah, because it's the same pagan system. Rome came out of Greece. Rome conquered Greece, adopted many of its flavors, repackaged, and moved forward. And of course, Papal Rome came out of Rome and is the embodiment of all these pagan powers together. But this is the continuation, which is the same color as the terrible beast, as the legs of iron, and so on. And of course, in Daniel 8, we also learn about the little horn again, so it confirms the same trajectory of history and pattern that the little horn will be ruling until the very end, which of course is the return of Jesus. Now, if we go one more layer here in the Daniel section, you have the time vision. So again, these on the sides tell you what you're looking at. You have the statue, you have the beasts, you have the ram and the goat visions, and then you have the time visions. The time visions are in Daniel 8, in Daniel 9, and in Daniel 12, which are basically these various time-specific prophecies, and they're very important, especially the 490-year or 70 weeks prophecy of the Messiah, which is from 457 to 34 AD. Again, I have a very in-depth video in my End Time series, 3.5 hours or so, breaking down historical, proofs for how that is fulfilled. The common understanding is that there's a giant gap and there's a future 70th week. That's all nonsense. So I really invite you to do your due diligence and look into that. But there's a lot of other prophecies in this section. And of course, there are things that need to be clarified, which is that the biggest one, which is the 2,300 days in most Bibles, is actually 2,400 days. This 2,400 day period ends in 1944. And again, I talk about this quite a bit in the walkthrough series, but why did I choose the 2,400 day over the 2,300 day? Well, here you'll see that there's a note called C Septuagint. Now, the Septuagint is a translation done by Jewish scholars, 70 Jewish scholars in and around 200 BC. They were translating the Hebrew scriptures, the original Hebrew scriptures that we don't have anymore, into the Greek because there was Hellenization. The Israelites were taken over by these pagan powers. They needed some scriptures for the newer generations. So that's a very important text to have. Why? Because the Masoretic text is corrupted. That's another thing that most people don't realize. I'm not saying don't trust your Bible. I'm not saying, whatever. I'm just saying when it comes to Bible translation, there are many things that need to be accounted for. Yes, God has preserved his word. He's preserved the truth about who he is, how to be saved. The truth has been preserved. Despite all of the shenanigans of history and Satan and pagan empires and persecutions, God has preserved his word. However, that doesn't mean we can idolize a particular translation and say it's absolutely perfect, because every translation, believe it or not, has mistakes in it. It doesn't mean that God's word has mistakes, but you're dealing with two things. You're dealing with the truth, and then you're dealing with how that truth was translated by flawed, imperfect people. So you have to realize that I have an entire series on the Masoretic psyop and why there are many problems with it. And we're not just talking about, well, this could have been translated better here and so on. That's not the issue. The issue is that there was a deliberate conspiracy by the rabbinic system, the rabbinic Jews, after Jesus to discredit Jesus and to create a counterfeit situation. And again, I'll leave it at that. I invite you and encourage you to go watch the Masoretic series. But this is why I chose the Septuagint reading, because after everything I evaluated and I documented in that series, the end times impacts of the Masoretic text, after everything I've personally evaluated, I believe that the Septuagint reading of the 2,400 days is the correct one, not the 2,300 days, which of course also invalidates the Seventh-day Adventist interpretation of 1844 and the investigative judgment. If you've run into that, of course, if you've looked into these things, the Seventh-day Adventists are practically the only ones still talking about the papal power being the Antichrist power on the earth. And of course, with that comes Ellen White and the investigative judgment. So if you've dug into this stuff at all, then you know what I'm talking about. That's why it's also important, because that completely erases that and you don't have to believe in it. So this is the 2,400 day prophecy. And of course, it goes all the way till, over here. Now, the important part about this is more so that it's in the past. You see, this is the you are here. You are right here. At the time of this video, 2025. So we are just ready to go, basically. That's why I said I believe we have 7 to 10 years before the return of Jesus. Whether it's 10, whether maybe it's even 15, does it really matter? I don't think we have 50. I don't think we have 100. That's for sure. Because all of these things are in the past, especially the enormous prophecy of 2,400 years. Now, within that period, there's also these three other periods. There's the 1335-year prophecy, there's the 1290 prophecy, and there's the 1260. The 1335 is probably the most mysterious one. I don't have a super good explanation for it. I do talk about it in my Daniel and Revelation walkthrough. It's only mentioned once, and there's practically zero context for it. So there's no point in being dogmatic about it. However, we do know that the 1290 and the 1260 do have historical significance. The 1260 is repeated multiple times in Revelation, so it's the most important out of all of these time prophecies. And of course, what happens as far as Daniel is concerned, in 538 AD, which is also when the little horn power, you can see now we're going to come back to this, just a really quick point. There's two ways to read this. Initially, I told you that the way to read this is line by line, right? Like you're reading a book. You start here and you read it sideways, and then you basically understand what's happening in that line. But then once you get to, let's say, the top of Daniel, now we can zoom out and create a better picture of this. So if I zoom out, you can see that now we have the vertical view as well. So there's the horizontal view, and you stack things on top of each other, and now you have the vertical view of what's going on. So if we just look at this 1260 period, which is here's the 1260 period. What's happening during this 1260 period? Well, if you draw just like a big square, you have the little horn power is ruling. There's the 2400-day prophecy. There's the 1290 prophecy. There's many things that are intersecting. There's the fifth and final empire on the earth. Right before the 1260, there's the three horns that got uprooted. So there's a lot of things that are happening. So you can construct a very interesting picture. And that's just with Daniel. Once we layer other things on top of it, like with Revelation, the apostate medieval church, which is, of course, Catholicism, the fourth seal, Islam's happening, the two witnesses, the woman running away from the dragon, the beast from the sea, and so on and so forth. The fifth head of Mystery Babylon. So there's a lot going on. It's such a rich, rich story that God has given us. And I'm very fortunate that I've had time and energy and focus to be able to put all this together for you so that you can save yourself the trouble and enjoy something and really marvel at God's plan. But anyway, back to Daniel. In the 1260 period, as far as history goes, Justinian made the Bishop of Rome basically the grand poobah. He referred to him as the head of the churches. 30 years before that, in 508, which begins the 1290-day period, a very important event happened for Europe, which is Clovis I of the Franks, which is a huge territory, converted to Catholicism. So that was kind of the blow that was the final blow to these pagan systems, from Arianism and all these other situations, to now Catholicism became the prime religion. It became the prime controller of all of Europe. And then, of course, a couple years later, 30 years later, Justinian, the next emperor, proclaims the Pope to be the corrector of heresies, the Bishop of Rome to be the head of all the bishops, and so on. So basically that begins the 1260-day period. And it ends in 1798, which you'll see is when the French Revolution happened. So that is very historically well documented. Again, all these things are very well documented in the particular series. But that's Daniel. And you can see just with Daniel, we have quite a lot of things. It's a very important book. And of course, it's something that a lot of people ignore when they're reading end times prophecies, or they go to Daniel and they cherry pick it. So that's another thing I hope that this resource will help you with, which is to understand to go line by line and just go very systematically through what you're doing, so that you don't cherry pick, so that you don't lean on your understanding, so that you don't misinterpret something out of context, so that you create everything as it's supposed to be, because God gave it to you line by line. Because it's the sequence of these things that ultimately paint the picture. Do you understand? All of these lines, if we go back to this thing, they act as witnesses with each other and history. When you have Daniel 2, it's laying a particular foundation. Then you have Daniel 7, and it seems that it's confirming the witness of the previous chapter, Daniel 2. Then you have Daniel 8, and it tells you the same similar order of empires, same little horn, what's happening. There's a continuation of these empires. So you see, again, the same witness. And of course, layer by layer, you have, by the time you get to, Revelation 20, you have how many countless witnesses telling you the same thing. That way you are absolutely 100% sure of what's going on. But most people don't do that. They'll just jump to like Revelation 20 or Revelation 12 and say, look, it says this or it says that. Well, how do you know what that says unless you've gone boom, 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 all the way through? And that's why I hope this resource will be very helpful. But nevertheless, you can't understand Revelation without Daniel. And that's very, very important. That's why Daniel's at the bottom and Revelation's at the top. And of course, that's why Daniel's first and Revelation is second. Daniel proves that historicism is the correct hermeneutic to use, not futurism and not preterism. It frames Bible prophecy correctly. The reason Daniel proves that historicism is the way prophecies are meant to be interpreted is because there's a lot of historical things happening in Daniel. Empires, time prophecies, and of course we talk about why the days in those prophecies are years. It has to do with the 490-year prophecy, the 70 weeks, because that's part of, let's go back here really quick. This is another important point that I missed, but there's so much to talk about. When Daniel talks to Gabriel in Daniel 8, at the end of Daniel 8, he gets this time prophecy of the 2400 years, and he's super confused. Imagine receiving such a vision. And he was sick. Daniel 9 begins, and Daniel is praying for clarity. Gabriel comes back and says, okay, I'm going to give you clarity. Here's the deal. Out of that period that you saw last time we talked, out of that, a chunk is reserved for the Messiah, for your people to do X, Y, and Z, for the Messiah to come, for righteousness to be completed, and so on and so forth. Why is that significant? Because that means that if this 490-year prophecy, which everybody acknowledges, because it's very explicit, is 490 years, then that means the prophecy that it was taken out of, which is the 2400-day prophecy, is also years. God is using a consistent principle of day to year, and there's a lot of times that he does that in Scripture. So that means that all of these prophecies are day to year, and therefore Revelation, in turn, is also day to year. So Daniel is an incredibly important text to understand in terms of end times events, because it sets the historical basis for all of these things to be interpreted. Now, Daniel has a lot of information already. You can see there's a lot to talk about. I have my walkthrough of these two books is 13 hours long, of the two books together. So you can imagine how much there's to talk about. Nevertheless, Daniel paints with a broad brush. It's a very broad historical brush. We certainly have a very good idea of what's going on, that there's these 5 empires, that after the 5th empire, there's this kind of different kind of power that comes out of these empires, and it comes after the Messiah. That's important. But we don't get a very specific picture of what's happening with the church, because Daniel is in the Old Testament. The church hadn't happened yet, so that's a very important point. That's why Daniel and Revelation and history together are like 3 witnesses. And I talk about this. It's a very fascinating concept. I talk about this more in the walkthroughs, but I also have an episode in my Sabbath series where I talk about the original calendar that God basically we still live in, but of course we haven't been using that calendar for a long time. The actual calendar of the earth is the sun's position in the constellations, with the moon as a second witness of that. When the moon comes out at night, you understand where in the sky in the constellation it is, because obviously during the day you can't see the constellations because the sun is too bright. So it's designed for you to watch and to basically compare witnesses. I think God is relational, and I think God has expressed that through the things in the created realm, which is that everything is relational, and you have to engage in these relationships and participate because God is relational. So anyway, the point is this. This is a tangent, but it's a very interesting tangent. The way that the calendar is meant to be, the real calendar, is the sun's position in the constellations, because there's 12 constellations throughout the year. And so the sun's position determines where you are in the year. It's very consistent. There's no intercalating required. It's the perfect calendar. Daniel, Revelation, and history act in a similar way. Revelation gives you the full, 4K color of what's happening in the church age. Daniel is sort of like the lesser light that paints with a broad brush of all these historical things, so that then Revelation come in and color in the details. And of course, the stars are the backdrop, right? The backdrop of history where Revelation is moving through. Do you understand? If we can basically imagine that a year is like this entire timeline, right? From beginning to end, from the beginning of history to the end of history, or I should say, I'd rather from the beginning of this history, which would be around 600 BC, to the end of history. If you can imagine that whole period would be like a year, right? Don't try to equate months and stuff to it. It's just symbolic. If that whole period was the year, and the string of constellations throughout the year would determine where the sun is, that's history. History is the string of constellations. And of course, stars have been compared to the saints and so on. So that's interesting because to me it says, okay, well, here's Moses, here's, Daniel, here's Jesus, here's, everybody's living through time. And so the star constellations are almost kind of like a map of history. And the sun is making its way through those constellations, through history. And you need to use the moon's position to understand where the sun actually is. Otherwise, you're not going to understand where you are in time. And that's, I think, a very interesting and profound way to look at it. But nevertheless, it tells you that you need to use these two books together. So now onward to Revelation. Revelation is here on top. And of course, it has a lot more to talk about because there's more going on, especially for the church age. We begin with Revelation 1 through 3, which is the 7 churches. And I'm going to zoom in, actually. Look at these cool pictures, man. Oh, I'm so delighted. It was a lot of work. I'm telling you, it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work to put this together. But I'm very thrilled with it. I'm very grateful to God that he's merciful and he's given me time to do it. So here's the first layer, which is the letters to the 7 churches, which is not just a letter to people in John's time. It is a prophecy of the phases of the church, which, if you notice, just like how Daniel begins with Daniel 2, sets a layer of things that are happening. This is exactly what happens with John. The phases of the church are what happens from John's time all the way to the return of Jesus. Now, that sets the context for all the other things that are unfolding, as you'll see throughout this time. Now, the 7 phases of the church are, when you see a squiggly line here, a tilde, this is approximation. I go into why I use these particular dates in the walkthrough, but nevertheless, they are relevant. They're not just dates that I pulled out of a hat. They're very relevant, but they're also approximations, so do not be dogmatic about these things. Nevertheless, the apostolic church is the first one, then you have persecuted. You have the compromised church, which is, of course, from after the persecutions ended, when Constantine came around and legalized Christianity and so on and so forth. And then you had the apostate or medieval Catholicism phase of the church, where it began the same phase as the Little Horn Power, 538 AD. But this phase of the church didn't last for 1260 years. It lasted until the Reformation. So a little bit less than that, because then you began the Reformed phase of the church, and then the missionary church after the French Revolution, because the French Revolution introduced atheism. And atheism obviously was a new thing, relatively speaking, in terms of people adopting it officially as a governmental secularism, that kind of thing. And that, for a period of time, really squelched Christianity. But it wasn't too long, just about 3 years, where it was officially atheism was the ruling paradigm in France. And then, again, I talk about all of this in the walkthroughs. Then you saw a resurrection of sorts of God's word. We'll talk about that when we get to the 2 witnesses, where basically you had, for a brief time, this is the shortest phase of the church, which is the missionary church, the Church of Philadelphia, brotherly love, going out into the world with Bible schools, Bible colleges, missionaries, evangelism, and things like that. So it's a very interesting situation. But of course, that didn't last too long, because you have the final phase of the church was the lukewarm church, which is around the mid-1800s all the way to modern day. So we are in the final phase of the church. Again, when you look at this vertically, you have multiple witnesses telling you the same thing. When people say, how do you know? Everybody's said that the end is near for the last 2,000 years. How do you know that we're at the end times? Everybody has said that. Well, I look at the witnesses. How many witnesses do we have so far? Well, if we go back to, let's just zoom out to make this easier. If we go back to our chart here in a zoomed out view, we see that we're past the 2400 period. We are, for the most part, like most of the Little Horn Power has been doing its thing. Most of the Little Horn period has been doing its thing. You are past the 1260 period. You are past the 1290 period. You're past the 1335 period. You're in the lukewarm church. You're in the final empire of Daniel 2. So and we still have many witnesses to go. Do you see all these witnesses, which tell you the same story? And that's why when you put them all on a layer, they're designed to work this way and to witness with each other. What does this one say? What does that one say? Oh, well, they're all saying the same thing, that we're at the end of the end. So that's a fascinating thing. So anyway, we're at the lukewarm church, which of course is not going to be raptured. If you have heard that the rapture is coming, then realize that it's a false doctrine. I'm sorry to say it. I know that everybody wants to escape persecution, but you will endure persecution because of Jesus. He will give you the strength. He will give you food. He will protect you. If you need to be interrogated, he'll give you peace. If you need to be executed, he'll give you peace. I know that's not a fun thing to think about, but the reality is, folks, that you're going to be here. However long that's going to be, you're going to be here until Jesus returns. So you have to get to terms with that and realize that most people are going to be deceived. You're part of the lukewarm church. So don't be part of it, right? Divorce yourself from the system. Revelation 18:4, come out over my people, and be set apart. Now, let's go to, if I just scroll here, go to the next lever, is the seven seals, which is Revelation 6 and 8. So that's layered on top. And of course, these seals, for the most part, are having to do with, from the believer's perspective, the trumpets and the seals are layered on top of each other. This is something, again, that is very counterintuitive for most people. People have been taught that the seals happen at the end of time. They don't. The seals are a historical thing, just like the trumpets, just like the phases of the church. It's the bowls that happen at the end of time, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But most of these seals are from the believer's perspective, and they have to deal with things that are happening in the church. But as you see towards the end, they also have to do with some supernatural things. The first seal is the rider on the white horse. No, this is not the Antichrist. Again, I'm just going to leave it at that. Please watch my walkthrough series. These are phases of the church. This is the church going out and conquering with the gospel, the kingdom of God entering the world. And of course, there are things that change throughout that, because the rider on the red horse is the persecuting phase of the church, where there was a lot of blood spilt. Then you have the compromising phase of the church, which is the third seal with the scales and, weighing this for that. Well, should we incorporate paganism? How much of it should we do? This kind of thing. Then you have the fourth horse, which is death. And if you realize that these things are symbolic for the phases of the church, the word of God, the true believing, way versus the counterfeit way, then you see that this is a degenerating picture. The first picture is the rider on the white horse. Well, Jesus is the rider on the white horse, and Yahweh has the bow in the Old Testament, and Jesus has the crown. So it's a conquering, basically, paradigm. But then you have persecution, then you have compromise, and then, of course, through medieval Catholicism, you have a pale horse, which is also interesting because there was a Black Death and plague during that time. Another interesting bit of history. But nevertheless, the pale horse is the death of truth, right? The truth doesn't completely die, but this is parallel to the two witnesses we'll talk about in just a minute, where the word of God was suppressed during medieval Catholicism. Medieval Catholicism, the little horn, the papal power, the fifth kingdom on earth, all these things were suppressing the word of God. People did not have personal Bibles. They couldn't even have a Bible at home. They didn't even understand how to read the Bible because it was all in Latin and excluded from them. So they were being made to follow a counterfeit path and blocked from the truth by the man of sin. And of course, we talk about that quite a bit. But this is the fourth seal, and it parallels, these first four seals parallel the phases of the church. You also have these other things that are kind of parallel, which is the fifth seal. It talks about the altar, the souls under the altar. No, this is not a vision of heaven, of people going to heaven. This is a symbolic vision. I have a whole series on the afterlife where I talk about the state of the dead. It's very important you understand that, because people use Revelation as a proof text of what happens to you after you die. Nothing happens to you. You die, and then you wake up and you're being resurrected. That's what happens. It's very important you understand that so that you're not deceived by false signs and wonders, like the apparition of Mary, or your dead relatives giving you a vision, or whatever else. Nevertheless, this is a symbolic thing, again, of persecution, of people being made white. What happened? Well, during that time was also the Reformed Church. People were being burned at the stake, Inquisition, things like that. Now we go to the sixth seal, which is the final seal before, obviously, Jesus returns, but it deals with supernatural signs and wonders. And these things do have their fulfillment, which is a very interesting thing. I talk about that in the walkthroughs. The 1700s, there was the greatest meteor shower ever to fall on the earth. I forget how many it was, but it was like 200,000 or something crazy. It's just a huge meteor shower. There was the greatest earthquake in Lisbon. I think it was like an 8-something magnitude earthquake, a very big earthquake. And also the Day of Darkness in the 70s. I forget the years for these things, but they're all very close to each other. the Great Day of Darkness in May something, I forget the 17, gosh, was it 40 or 80, something like that. Very fascinating event where it was just pitch dark during the middle of the day. It wasn't an eclipse. It was a supernatural type of darkness. Very, very interesting. So these things have actual fulfillments. And the point of all this is that we can find these historical fulfillments, see them as a witness to what we just saw, which is the phases of the church, and realize that, again, yes, we are at the end of the end. You are here. You're past you're in the final church. The sixth seal has been opened. Let's put it that way. Because some of these things are throughout time. There are many fulfillments that are in the sixth seal. Another important thing to note while I'm here, I'm just trying to get all the information out as much as I can, but another important thing to note is that these aren't like specific times that like a seal happened in, 1755. No, this is a phase. The seal is being opened, and there are many fulfillments to the seal. Now, the sixth seal specifically has supernatural fulfillments, which I just mentioned, the earthquake, the meteor shower, and the day of darkness. These things happened in the past. We are well past those things, which is another sign with the end. However, the sixth seal is interesting because it also has something in there about basically the wealthy of the kings of the earth hiding in their bunkers, it seems like, where the return of Christ is happening, and they're hiding and they're praying that the rocks just crush them so they don't have to deal. Of course, they're going to deal with God because they're going to be resurrected and thrown in the lake of fire. But the point is that the sixth seal has opened, and there's still parts of that seal that are yet to be fulfilled, which is the final, vision you see there of the kings of the earth running and basically hiding from the presence of God, which is what? Because he's returning. So that's an interesting thing because the sixth kind of goes right into the seventh seal. Now, of course, if you follow this, you will see, and I have other graphics too within my End Times series, all those various series. If you go into the library as a paid member, it's only $5 a month or $50 a year. You can download all of my stuff, all my videos, all my presentation notes. But anyway, the point is within the directory of the End Time series, the Great Delusion series, Synagogue of Satan, Daniel Revelation walkthrough, you will be able to see some graphics about the trumpets and the seals, the woes, just a little more simpler than this. If this is a little overwhelming, you can see something simpler where everything is laid out so you can see the timing of these things. Again, the phases of the church, the seals, the trumpets are all historical. They're happening throughout history, layering on top of each other. We'll see a bird's eye view in just a second. The seventh of the seal, the trumpet, and the seventh bowl is happening at the end when Jesus returns. And of course, also the third woe. We'll look at the woes too. They're not, super detailed, but they're in there. It's important to understand that they're just, again, another indicator that we're at the end. We're past the two woes. All we have yet is the third woe. The third woe is when Jesus returns. We're past the six seals. The end of the six seals, like I said, with the rocks falling on the kings of the earth, but most of it's been fulfilled. As you'll soon see, we're past the sixth trumpet. We're in the seventh and final phase of the church. So all of this means that we are at the end of the end. I don't know exactly the time, but my educated guess is 7 to 10 years. Now, very importantly, this little section is one of those, again, where the time doesn't allow a lot of layout to be presented because it's a very short situation. You have the 6 bowls. Bowls 1 through 6 happen right at the end. So again, let me zoom out so you see a clear picture of this. You can see that this is we haven't gotten to the trumpets yet, we'll do those next, but you have churches, seals, trumpets, okay? And they're all layered on top of each other. And at the very end, you can see the bowl judgments begin. So the bowls are the things that are future, correct. And those happen very quickly. Why? Because there's no timestamps in them. And they're literal. Whereas the seals and the trumpets give you timestamps, which means that they're being fulfilled historically. Whereas the bowls are at the end. And we also know because the bowls begin with people who took the mark. So that means the mark has to be the prophetic marker of history to when the bowls drop. That's why I say there are still people to draw out of this system until you see sores breaking out all over people and you start seeing the rivers turn to blood and darkness and things like that. Those will be literal plagues, and they're going to be happening very quickly. So the next thing to watch is these Sunday laws, is the mark, is this Christian nationalist New World Order system coming into power, the image of the beast, everything that I talk about in my Venerable Day of the Sun news updates. But we're not there yet. So the bowls need to drop when the mark of the beast is being enforced, when they start throwing people in jail, when they start executing you, when, they start kicking you out of society. Those types of things are indicators that we are very close to the bowl judgments. Once the bowl judgments drop, my guess is it's going to be, again, educated guess, anywhere between 1 month to maybe 3 months. I really don't know, but it's not going to be a year or 2 or 3 or 5 years of bowl judgments. It's not. It's going to be a very quick situation because these things mirror the bowls, the plague judgments of Egypt. So that's typologically significant. A lot of relationships there. And if you do the math, which I've done in, one of my Sabbath episodes, I think we talked about the timeline of the Egypt plagues, but it's about 40 days, approximately. So the plagues in Egypt didn't take years or months even. That's why I think these things will be very quick. So again, the phases of the church and the seals, they're related to each other. Now, if we go to the trumpets, and if we zoom in here, a lot of people say that the first 4 trumpets have to deal with Rome. I take the position that the first trumpet has to deal with the Jews and the temple being destroyed. I think it's a very significant judgment. Again, I document why I believe that in my walkthroughs. It's not something to be dogmatic about. The point is that trumpets are significant of judgments in history. And they are happening historically. Why is that meaningful? Because we are past the 6 trumpets and we're at the end. The trumpets are not in the future. That's the main thing to understand. However, I do think there's a case to be made that the first trumpet is about the Jews. The second through the 4th trumpet deals with Rome. And again, these are approximate time periods. And of course, Rome was judged by all the barbarian tribes. And then you have the 5th trumpet, which is Islam. And Islam was a judgment on the papacy and also on the Byzantine Empire from around the 7th century to the 15th century. And there's a very specific timestamp there that it gives you, and I talk about that in the particular walkthroughs. Trumpet 6 is also Islam. It's a continuation through the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire's job was to kind of finish judgment on Europe, on the papacy, and also provide a window by breaking the attention of the beast and breaking its iron fist. A window for what? Well, what do you have before that? Well, if we scroll down vertically, you had the 5th seal, the souls under the altar, resembling persecutions, and the Reformation, the printing press, the Inquisition, the Pilgrims running away to America, the Reformation. All of these things happened while the second woe, which is the 6th trumpet, the Ottoman Empire, was also happening. So you see, there's a lot of things happening. Now, the first woe, which I missed, the first woe is encompassing Islam, but it also deals with the 1260-day period of the 2 witnesses and everything we'll be covering next. So there's overlap there. This is important to understand. But nevertheless, the first woe begins with the 5th trumpet, which is Islam. And again, that judges the papacy and Byzantine. And the second woe begins with the 6th trumpet, and that's the Ottoman Empire and judgment on the papacy and so on. Again, the bowls 1 through 6 begin with the mark of the beast, meaning once the mark has been enforced, at some point after that, the bowl judgments will begin. Now, we know that time, that buffer of time, once the mark is heavily enforced, and then the first bowl judgment drops, that time period is very short. Why do I say that? I say that because of something that's not written in here, although probably should, but I just don't have any room for it. Jesus said that there would be some left alive. Jesus said that there would be some left alive, meaning if the days hadn't been shortened, then nobody would have been left alive, right? That was the comment. I forget where chapter, I think is it Luke 21 or Matthew 24, somewhere in there? One of the end times situations. But nevertheless, the point is that qualifier gives us an idea that, okay, well, if they're throwing people in prison and throwing you out of society and making you starve and killing you, obviously that there's a limit on that because some people have to be left alive. Meaning once they start doing that, then okay, look up, and every Sabbath you celebrate is going to become exceedingly more meaningful, I can tell you that. So that's the trumpets. Again, if you want more detail on that stuff, watch the walkthroughs. The next section or layer on top of this is Revelation 12 through 13. And of course, there's a lot of things that happen here that are very significant. All these chapters are significant. But Revelation 12 has some very important things in it as well. It has the war in heaven, which is talked about in Daniel 12 and Revelation 12 and also Revelation 20. There's meaning for all these chapters. The reason I say Daniel 12 is that it mentions that Michael will stand up at that time for your people. Now, of course, some people believe that Michael is Jesus, and that is not true. That is not true. I have a whole explanation on that in the walkthrough series, why those two beings are different. One is self-existent, one is created. So very big difference. But that seems to relate to Revelation 12, which is where Michael and Satan are fighting, and Satan gets kicked out of heaven as the accuser. And Revelation 20 is in there, as you'll see. We'll get there because Satan is bound for the period of time that Christ is ruling and that the saints are ruling with him. A lot of people believe that the 1,000 years is literal and it's in the future, which of course is not true. We'll get to that in just a minute. But nevertheless, this is the war in heaven. When did that happen? It happened at the crucifixion. Very important, because this is when Satan was bound. Satan lost his authority. Because there is an atonement, because we have an advocate, because Christ has conquered death and taken the power of death away from Satan, Satan has lost his power as of 31 AD. That's a very significant event in history. Now, we zoom in later in chapter 12 of Revelation, and chapter 13 as well, for these 12 60-day periods of time. And here you have three images. You have basically the olive trees and the lampstands. You have the woman running away from the dragon, and then you have the sea beast. I think the AI did great on this. I described the sea beast from Revelation. I was like, man, I think it really did a great job. And also, of course, the false prophet. So there's a lot going on in these chapters. These three things are all happening at the same time. Very important. So if I zoom out, you can see really quick, you can see this section of time. This is all happening at the same time. So rather than making three layers of these things, I just put three pictures all in one section and it's got a little blurb here that tells you basically 1260-day period of the two witnesses, the word of God, in parentheses, being suppressed, the woman, i.e. the church, fleeing persecution, and the first beast from the sea, which is the papacy ruling with an iron fist until the French Revolution, which is right here, this little arrow, which is where the mortal wound happened. So the arrow points to you, this red, well, it's not red, it's black, but the red arrow points to you where the mortal wound happened. What else happened at the mortal wound? Well, you had, basically the end of the Reformation Church, the beginning of the missionary church. You had the false prophet coming around that time. You had also the sixth head of the Mystery Babylon, the wounded papacy. We'll get to that in just a second. So a lot of things happen. So you can read this vertically and get familiar with it. And you can also read it horizontally, which I think is really useful. But then the false prophet emerged around this time, the second beast from the earth, and that is the United States. And that has been ruling from the 1798, from the French Revolution, approximately. Of course, the United States is slightly older than that, but I marked it with the mortal wound from the present. The phase of the false prophet is from around that time. Now, if we go up to Revelation 17, Mystery Babylon, this is a new addition to this End Times Prophetic Timeline. It is not on the old one. This is basically mirroring what Daniel 2, if we go just zoom out super, you can see it's the same as is, so here, I was going to say as above, so below, oh my gosh. It's the same at the top as it is at the bottom. But it is, I mean, look, let's be honest really quick that let's not give the devil too much credit, okay? The devil didn't make up as above, so below. God made a very beautiful dualistic system, the dance of life. Yin and yang. Yin and yang, as just a symbol of duality, is telling you the truth, that there is male and female, sun and the moon, dark and light, up and down, left and right. We live in a dualistic system. It's not evil, okay? What's evil is how these people use this wisdom to try to be like God without a relationship with God. This wisdom, which has helped me greatly to understand and have discernment and to walk the narrow road and avoid imbalances on both the left and the right, because I studied duality quite a bit through my profession, that wisdom is supposed to point you to God. If anchored correctly, that wisdom is supposed to point you to God. So, in some sense, yes, you can see that Revelation is the same as Daniel. This anchors, if we write this on a chart like I did here, you can see that the beginning is also the same as the end, right? So this tells you that there's a power that continues throughout history. If I just scroll a little bit this way, continues throughout history through these various empires. This at the bottom tells you there's a power that continues throughout history into these various empires. What happens at the end? Well, the second coming and ends history and destroys this system. But it's going to be around until the end. So that's very important. So we have a very nice, harmonious story, which of course tells you that the intelligence who put this together is none other than God, because there's no other way that a human or a group of humans even could conceive of such a thing. And it could be true according to history. So you're dealing with an infinite intelligence, which is so profound. But nevertheless, Revelation 17, Mystery Babylon, you have the empires, you have the 7 heads of the beast that she rides. And these are 7 kings throughout time. 5 of them have fallen, 1 now is, according to John's vision, and 1 has to come for a little while, and then the 8th is the final phase of this thing. So what is that? Well, from what I have looked into it, again, I'll refer you to the videos for an in-depth explanation as to why I choose these, but it's obvious that the heads begin with Babylon, because if you begin with Egypt or any other, like Assyria, it doesn't work out. And I'll explain that in just a second. So it's Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and Papal Rome is the 5 heads that have fallen. The one that now is, for John, when he's seeing this vision, is the wounded papacy. He's being transported into the future. He's in this phase of time where after the mortal wound happens. And then the point of this is telling you that there's another head that's coming. There's another head that's coming, and he has to rule for a little while. And what is that head? That head is the United States, is the false prophet. That is the 7th empire in that sense of this phase of empires. Because the United States leads to the ultimate empire, which is the image of the beast. The United States, which is the false prophet, what's the role of the false prophet? It works in the presence of the beast to work signs and wonders to deceive people into building an image of the beast, i.e. a new world order, a representative government that mirrors, let's go zoom out just a second, that mirrors this. Apostate medieval Catholicism, the little horn power, the 5th kingdom on earth. That's what it wants to go back to, which is what we will go back to for a short period of time, thank God, but nevertheless we will go back to it, where the Catholic Church was supreme and the Pope was worshipped as God on earth. And this is the final iteration. So this is the 7th head. And of course the 8th, in this gray box here, it says the kings of the earth give their power to the beast, the image of the beast, the mark of the beast, the new world order, the resurrected papacy, which is the 8th. So these things have not happened yet. That's why they're in the future, and that's why they're in the same block basically as the return of Christ, because they're not going to last very long. But they will happen, and they're in the future. We are, again, where are you here? Where's the arrow? You are here. So if we draw a line all the way up, we're right towards the end of the false prophet's history. If you know the history of the United States, after the Civil War, how it was subjugated by the Jesuits. I talk about that quite a bit in my Synagogue of Satan series. We're at the end of this 7th head, which is about to give way to the 8th, which is the resurrected papacy, which is the image of the beast. So we're at the end of the end, folks. And this is a nice little paragraph here. It says, for Mystery Babylon, because it's not just the Catholic Church. It's Mystery Babylon, the mystery religion of the ages from the Garden of Eden to the end of time. Spirit of Antichrist ruling through world empires, manifesting in the church age as a counterfeit bride of Christ. The 5th and final empire of Daniel II, the Catholic Church with its God King, the Pontifex Maximus. So this is the system that's been around since the very beginning. Now, the final part of this is the Revelation 20 chapter, which is, again, I have a whole, besides the End Time series, within that series is a whole video dedicated to Revelation 20 specifically, because there's so much that people take out of context with this particular chapter. But you have 2 main events that are very important. You have Jesus ruling from heaven and Satan being bound. One goes up, one goes down, right? And that begins, you can see, it begins with the war in heaven, 31 AD, and the ascension shortly after. Jesus takes his rightful throne, place at the right hand of the Father, fulfills Daniel 7, the Son of Man. He begins the ruling period, ruling from heaven. When he returns, 1 Corinthians 15:26, this is all written in here. The resurrection happens and death is destroyed, which is the last enemy. That means the ruling period comes to an end and eternity begins. So Jesus is ruling from heaven right now. Now, an important distinction that I also talk about here is that the millennial reign, which a lot of people think, again, is future, it's not. People also think it's referring to Jesus' ruling period. It's not, actually. That is a profound discovery to be made here. that Revelation 20 is not talking about Jesus' ruling period. So important. I talk about this in depth in that episode. It's talking about the saints ruling with Jesus. I have a specific chart in the folders of this that outlines because I wouldn't do it on here because the time distances wouldn't be specific enough. Like, it's slightly shorter of a period. What do I say? Okay, I'll be right back. Okay, we're back. I did not plan this particular graphic, but it's just easier to show you and show you why I did not include this distinction on the End Times Prophetic Timeline, because it would be difficult to include. Nevertheless, this graphic is available in the folder for all these End Times series, and you can just download it, or it's available just to save as a JPEG if you want to use it. The Revelation 20 does not talk about Jesus' ruling period. That's another thing that people get wrong. So again, they get wrong that it's in the future, that it's literal. It's not. It's present. It's spiritual. It's metaphorical for a long period of time, which is the church age. And it's not talking about Jesus' ruling period, because Jesus' ruling period is outlined in Psalm 110, and it's given you a specific ending by Paul in 1 Corinthians 15:26. When death is destroyed, the last enemy is done. That happens at the resurrection, and we know that because Jesus returns, the last trumpet blows, the dead in Christ are raised, and the ruling period is over. So the ruling period of Christ is very well defined from other verses. Revelation 20 is not telling you when Jesus is ruling. It's telling you when the saints are ruling with Jesus. Do you get it? So important. And on this graphic, we can see it very clearly. So Jesus began ruling at the ascension. Remember, Revelation 12, war in heaven. Jesus goes up, fulfills Daniel 7. Satan goes down. He's kicked out of the court. No more room for the accuser. So the ruling period begins. The ruling period ends when? When Jesus returns, which is on the 7th of, 7th of all these things. 777. 7th bowl, 7th seal, 7th trumpet, 3rd woe. At that intersection, Jesus returns, the resurrection happens, eternity begins. So Jesus' ruling period is from these 2 points. But it is slightly longer than the ruling period of the saints, which is the millennial ruling period. Again, it's not literally 1,000 years, it's just a long period of time. But that's what Revelation is talking about. It's not talking about Jesus' ruling period. And that ruling period for the saints is slightly shorter. Why? Because the church didn't begin until Acts 2, Pentecost, which was after the ascension, a couple weeks after. And it also ends before Jesus returned, slightly, a couple weeks, maybe a month or 2, I don't know, depending on how long those bowls last, because once the bowl judgments drop, they are not designed for anybody to repent. In fact, you can read through it really quickly and see that people don't repent. They just curse God because they took the mark and they're wicked. And so they're not designed to bring people out of this mystery religion system. Once the bowl judgments start dropping, it's judgment time. That means we know from other places there's no condemnation for the elect, Romans 8 verse 1, that the elect have been sealed by that point. Once the first bowl judgment drops, right here you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, this period of time is over. The ruling of the saints is over. Now, what does that mean, the saints rule? Well, again, go to my walkthrough for that. Ruling and conquering are images that are consistently revealed, not just in Revelation especially, but in other places, as being spiritual symbols for endurance. Enduring in faith. You conquered just like Jesus conquered. You conquered the devil, you conquered death, you conquered temptation by enduring in faith. So this period of time that Revelation 20 is talking about, which is parallel to the ruling period of Christ, but again, on this sheet, on the End Times Prophetic Timeline, the time, differences would be super tiny. You wouldn't be able to significantly see it. Does that make sense? That's why I just wrote in the comments what it would mean. But anyway, that ruling period is different. Where is this? Revelation 20 timeline. Here we go. Then the ruling period of Christ, because it's slightly shorter. It begins a little bit after, and it ends slightly before Jesus' return. So that's an important distinction. Again, Satan is released on the 6th bowl to deceive the nations and to begin Armageddon. This is a recapitulated event. When the bowl judgments happen, the first instance of Satan being released and doing his dirty, deceptive work to rally people for Armageddon is in chapter 16, on the sixth bowl. Then you have a recapitulation in chapter 17 of the kings of the earth giving their power to the beast, which is the same thing. They're giving their power, they're waging war. Then you have an image of conquering over these people in Revelation 19 with the rider on the white horse. Then finally you get to Revelation 20, it's the same thing again. So you can't read Revelation 20 isolated from itself. You have to look at the witnesses before that. That's the way it's designed to be read. And that means that Revelation 20 is a recapitulation of the battles previously of Armageddon. Well, what's the first one? What's the first mention? What do the other witnesses tell you? Where the first witness, chapter 16, tells you that the release of Satan happens on the sixth bowl. So the little season, if we go back to this little thing here, the little season is very little. It's between the sixth bowl and the seventh bowl, the return of Jesus. Satan is released for a little while in the sense of being able to deceive people into such a crazy outcome as to fighting against God himself. That's why the binding of Satan, if we go back to our end times prophetic timeline, the binding of Satan has nothing to do with cessation of satanic activity. Anybody can notice that we've been, completely ruled by the devil over the last 2,000 years, increasingly more and more so. The devil's been just doing shenanigans left and right. So obviously, the binding of Satan doesn't mean stopping of satanic activity. Satan is bound from preventing God's plan from being successful, i.e. saving the elect, prophecies happening, judgments, the trumpets, the seals happening. You can't do anything to stop that. He's also prevented from deceiving the world into all-out combat against God. Because of history, because he's trapped in time and space, that thing isn't appointed until at the very end. That's why Satan is released. Throughout time, God has given, whatever Satan does, God is the one that either allows it or doesn't allow it. God is sovereign over evil. So at the very end, God sends them strong delusion, gives Satan the authority, releases him to basically do this thing to deceive them into bringing all these nations into one army against Jesus as a judgment on the wicked so that they can be destroyed. So the little season thing that's going around right now, at least the time of this video, people keep asking me about the little season. When's the little season? The little season's not yet, folks. It's between the sixth bowl and the seventh bowl. It's a tiny season. If we've been in the little season, think about this, okay? Just think critically for a second. If the little season happened, like some people say we've been in a little season for like hundreds of years, like that's not a little season. That's a very significant period of time. So it has to be a little season, and that means that it's happening between the sixth and seventh bowl, probably for a few weeks, maybe a few months, who knows? It's not going to be a few years, I don't think. That's for sure, because the bowl judgments are happening very quickly. So that's Revelation 20, with the binding of the devil throughout this time while Jesus is ruling supreme and conquering death, and obviously conquered death, but we're conquering death by enduring in faith and conquering with him so that we're resurrected in faith. So that's basically it. And I think that was it for the whole timeline. So, conclusion, Revelation is the most symbolic book of the Bible. It has to be taken very carefully. It was added to the canon last out of all the 27 books because it was so controversial. So, be responsible with it. Unfortunately, today, many people do not read it correctly because they don't understand everything we did in this very brief walkthrough. And you can see even with the briefness of this walkthrough, it's already been an hour or so because there's just so much to talk about. There's so much context, there's so much history that you need to learn. And again, although I don't claim to know everything about Revelation, I don't think anybody does, I do believe that the important things can be discerned. If you go systematically like we do through here, and you go through history, use history as a second witness, I believe that that the important things can be discerned. What are the important things? The beast. Who's the beast? It's not some future charming guy that's walking into a rebuilt Jewish temple, I can tell you that. The beast has been around for a very long time. And of course, if you know what the beast is, then you know what the image of the beast is and the mark of the beast, and therefore the trajectory of history, which is a false light, counterfeit, golden age, Christian, nationalist, New World Order situation. Not a golden age utopia because we defeated the deep state and now we can celebrate in peace and safety, which is what all of the counterfeits are telling you. So be careful, learn the truth, learn your history, understand Bible prophecy, understand how to go through this systematically. You don't have to know everything. You really don't. You just have to know the key things. And some other things will be revealed to you as time goes on. A lot of this stuff is the product of intense study on my part over the last couple years. When I initially made my End Times Prophetic Timeline, it was a particular version. Then I added more to it. Then, let me correct this. Then I realized that Revelation 20 wasn't talking about Jesus' ruling period. It was talking about the saints ruling with Christ. I was like, oh, well, everybody's got it wrong then. Even I had it wrong. I didn't realize now that makes a ton more sense, because now there's room for Satan's little season, and it makes totally perfect sense. So these things get revealed to us as we go along, but the key is that we use proper principles and we love the truth. Now, a couple final thoughts for you. Most people are going to be deceived by what is coming. If you know your history and you interpret Revelation according to the book of Daniel, like we did here, and you go methodically, layer by layer, you can use this to go vertically, you can use it to go horizontally, you'll learn the truth. And that's why I think this timeline is so powerful. It's such a powerful resource. Again, I'm very grateful that God gave me the wisdom and the knowledge and the skills too. I did this all by myself. Not that I'm trying to brag or anything, but had I hired a designer to do this, this would have cost me thousands of dollars to hire a designer to do this. So I'm very grateful that I have the experience and that God can leverage the skills that I used for stupid things in the past to do something that can actually serve you and glorify God, really, because when you look at this, it's like, gosh, let me zoom out again. Let's take a look at this whole thing. Look at this beautiful thing. I mean, what a beautiful story we're wrapped up in. What a beautiful story. Look how much action and just history and so much is happening, so much. And we are at the end, man. You are here. You're at the end of this crazy story where the knight in shining armor is coming to rescue you from the dragon. It's such a profound thing to be at the end of this corridor of time and to look back and see, wow, we got all of this and we can put it together in a timeline and we can look at it. You know, somebody like Daniel, when he was over here, if we go back to, he was right here, right? He was around this time. All of this was future for him. Imagine when he got that vision and he had no idea what to do himself. Imagine John, who was, let's see, 0, he was around right here sometime. He got all of this in his mind, probably experienced it visually too, who knows? To see all of this and had no historical idea, absolutely, what it is. Now we get to be at the end of that and put it all together and relish in that knowledge. I think that is an amazing gift. So it's a marvel. I hope that it's a blessing, and I hope it empowers you to marvel and also to help others learn and marvel as well. It really is an amazing time to be alive. So don't be complacent. If God has given you understanding and given you knowledge, do not be complacent, my friends. Use these resources. There's also a postcard version of this that you can print out, or not print out. You can print it out if you are a member. You can download it if you want, but you can buy it from the store for $10. There's 10 of them. They come in a pack, and you can give them out to people. They're really high quality printed, nice glossy paper. The poster is available in many sizes. You can get the regular poster. You can get a canvas print. You can get all kinds of stuff. You can get them as gifts for people. You can get them as, maybe decorations for your church if they'd be willing to do something like that. I'm happy to answer questions on these things. The Bible studies are free. They're on YouTube. They're on my website. You have QR codes to scan them. So anyway, I hope this was useful. I really do. Please use it. Enjoy it. Take care, and God bless.